Welcome back to Taiwan versus the world. Today we will talk about how Taiwan does marketing with two professionals from the field. This will be a very practical and down-to-earth analysis of how Taiwan presents its brand to the world. Then we will discuss two important books to read to understand Taiwan's place in the world today. And first, let's go to our interview. Today we will explore again a theme related to Taiwan's soft power and how the country can broaden its influence, not only its public institutions, but also its private citizens. So let's talk about marketing and talking with two professionals of marketing active in Taiwan, Jason Patterson and Matthew Ryan. Jason and Matt, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Let's start with an introduction of both of you. Matt, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, my name is Matthew Ryan. Been living in Taiwan for 11, 12 years now. Currently, I'm serving as global marketing director for iColor, and we're AI transformation and tech company in Taipei. And I used to do freelance marketing for a while and worked for numerous multi-tech companies in Taiwan doing marketing. I also did my master's degree here in social science a long time ago.
I'm Jason Patterson. I'm founder of Jewel Content Marketing Agency. I've been living in Taiwan for something like 12 years now. And we help Taiwan's B2B and tech companies make an impact on the global stage.
Thanks a lot. As a way of introduction to start the conversation, what can you tell me as international professional of marketing about what is specific about Taiwan in the marketing industry? In good or bad, just give me your general impressions about what you think is specific about the country.
What's good is, people work very hard here. Agencies here work, they work quite fast. They work at like long hours and a hard pace. And for the domestic market, I think that there's quite a lot more innovation and stuff than people see. On the bad side, I think that the market here is not broad enough. When I mean broad, there's a lot of emphasis on performance marketing, a lot of emphasis on events, but like in terms of branding or kind of the soul of marketing or kind of the deeper kind of understanding the connection to between brands or products or solutions and the market or consumers, I think is pretty weak. There's not People don't spend a lot of time compared to Western companies. People don't spend a lot of time brainstorming and kind of the preliminary stages before campaigns. They like to just kind of start and get straight into things. So a lot of times, there's a lot of action, and things take longer because people just want to kind of do things rather than spend time thinking. I think there's kind of also an emphasis in Taiwan is like I was speaking to someone yesterday is like all kind of marketing is linked to revenue, and there's not really kind of a respect for like wider market and brand awareness and stuff like that.
Right, interesting. Jason, what do you think?
Well, domestically, I agree with Matt. There's a lot more innovation and a lot more things that really grab you, and make you say, wow, than than maybe the rest of the world knows about. Oh, in terms of overseas, in terms of the face that Taiwan presents to the world, it's important to remember that a lot of the global brands here, the big global names are tech companies. And Taiwan's tech companies have a lot of the same problems with marketing and branding that tech companies everywhere do. I mean, except I would say in Taiwan, it's maybe a little more, to a greater degree. Let, let's say because Taiwan is just, very, very engineering focused. Taiwan probably has a lot of engineers in decision-making capacities in its global brand companies, people with a very technical background. And Taiwanese companies will often try to solve marketing and branding problems with engineering solutions. You know, they will treat them as a something to be engineered. But the inherent issue is you are talking about psychology, you know, brand, marketing, persuasion. It is psychology, and you cannot simply engineer a solution to a psychology problem. And I feel that that is a big issue here.
That's a very interesting insight, Jason, and I heard that Matt was approving. Matt, you agree with this assessment that it's viewed too much as engineering rather than as a psychology or even maybe creativity?
Yeah, definitely. I think like, and I can echo that. Even a lot of like marketing managers, especially in tech companies, come from engineering backgrounds, and yeah, they don't kind of what I said coming before. They don't really respect. They don't really understand or have like the basis for the kind of the softer, spiritual, more psychological side of marketing.
And what solutions would you offer then? We are diving right into the meat of the topic here. So how do you think that would be solved?
I think Taiwan's got some good markets. I really think like my conclusion is that Taiwan has some people who are really good marketers who studied abroad, who've got some good ideas. But you know, a lot of these people are younger, and just as Jason said, a lot of is they have to answer to decision makers who you know that usually do come from engineering backgrounds who don't really understand what they're doing. So I mean, if you're talking about companies, one, I guess you've got to trust marketers' profession, trust people's like professional background and skills, and two, I think you're going to need like to see some kind of turnover in like a generation of people, of decision makers before there's going to be real change. That's what I think.
I do agree that I agree with Matt that the decision makers are often a generation older, than the marketers, and so what the marketers know, what the marketers understand is different than what the decision makers do. And I do agree that there needs, some of that will happen when there's more turnover there. But I also feel that we don't necessarily have to wait for that entirely, because I feel that right now it's all about AI. But I think, that Taiwan has had a few years to get with it use it in its marketing. But eventually, they're going to start realizing that AI is not enough. No matter how much they integrate it, no matter how much they use it, it's not going to deliver commensurate gains in revenue, market share, profit, whatever your big numbers that you're measuring by itself. It simply won't happen. You need a brand behind it. You need brand strategy, marketing strategy. You need these things. Otherwise, AI will not perform. It will not deliver the gains like you want it to.
Yeah, this is, I'm very profane compared with you guys. Of course, I work in media, so not in marketing. I am far from having your expertise, but what you're saying here echoes a few things that I have observed. First, as I remember also when the internet emerged, it's as simple as that. And there was also this feeling that it was a solution to everything. I'm going to be online and it's going to work. I'm going to be rich, but it's about what you put on it. So what you're saying, Jason, and I heard again that Matt was approving, is that, well, AI is not going to solve your problems if you don't have an idea. That also this concept of that if you put crap into the AI, it's just going to give you crap in return, which is as old as computers pretty much. If you don't give the right data or not ask the right answers, or not ask the right questions, you're not going to have the right answer. Am I right?
Yes, I would. You're right, and I would add something to that. Remember, AI is trained on the internet. And the internet is mostly crap. So crap is its default state. That means you have to put a lot of effort into it. You have to really put your good ideas and your good thinking and your good brand messaging into it. You got to put, you really got to put a lot of yourself into it if you want to get something good out of it.
I'll just take a step back from. I think I agree with Jason. I'll take a step back. What he was talking about. You need a brand. I think brand strategy, with whatever tools you're using, you need a strategy, and it needs to be championed throughout companies, and which really kind of happens because you have a lot of people who don't really respect branding, kind of like overruling stuff or come up with ideas. But it doesn't matter what you're unless you have a strong brand strategy, like your AI strategy is not going to work. And I totally agree with that. So you can't really escape the fundamentals of marketing. And there was something I wanted to add as well, what I just thought about is that one of the reasons for this in Taiwan, this has been said to me, and I also observed myself, is that so much business is done in Taiwan based on relationships, and the same in a lot of East Asia, same in China. And companies here, you can be a supplier in the TSMC supplier chain, and you can have like basically no website, and your main customer is TSMC, and you can be doing hundreds of millions of US dollars in revenue, just based on relationships, going to the right universities, playing golf with the right people, knowing the right people. And that's like so much of how business is done in Taiwan. So, but that's not how things work in the US. That's not how things work in the West, where brand is really important, where consistency, when strong messaging, strong content is really important. And I don't think the leaders kind of get that point. And then going back to what Jason was saying, it doesn't, like, AI is not going to solve that problem until you kind of like deal with a fundamental issue about having these strong brand fundamentals. AI won't be the panacea to solve that problem.
And this is something that your answers, both of you, was inspiring to me also. It seems like it boils down to leadership. It touches also on a problem that I think a lot of people observe when they arrive in Taiwan, which is can almost talk some sort of gerontocracy, like old people just decide everything. It exists a bit everywhere, but here pretty much here young professionals are completely crushed by their seniors on absolutely every levels, even when the seniors are either let's say past their prime, so to speak, or even sometimes just not even competent. So there's also a bit of a society problem here, because both of you seem to think that this needs a change in leadership, but the leadership is kind of a bit like ossified between senior people who are not going to change, right?
I just want to add as well, like, it's not just the leadership, it's also culture. It's like in a Western company, more of a flat culture, you can question your boss or you can question your manager, but that rarely happens here. So, if you work on a project, you work on a design, you work on something, and then some 60-year-old guy says, "Oh no, I've just made a new logo in PowerPoint and we use that now." You don't really very few people argue with him, and you end up with these kind of really bad results.
Matt just touched on a point that I think is also important to that. It's not just about age per se. In Taiwan, marketing leaders also, they very much take an interest in kind of the small details, the little things, it more so than I've seen elsewhere. You may have a marketing director who is very much concerned about a little bit of copy or this little bit of some LinkedIn post that your company is doing. All these little things. They may have very strong opinions in it and may get very involved in it. And even the higher level leaders might also do that. You don't see that just everywhere. I've been in situations where the marketing director's job, they mostly managed up. They dealt with the executives, they dealt with more high level things. But here, Leaders are very tactical, very involved. They like getting involved, and probably I think probably in many cases more than they really should, because I believe leaders should lead and they should allow their workers, their subordinates to do and handle and take more responsibility of the work themselves.
So, of course, this is something that would be extremely difficult to change. It seems like we are almost talking about making some sort of revolution, even deep into the psychology of people. And yet, all of this impacts Taiwan. I would like to ask you the question, what do you think all of this has as a consequence in terms of the image of the country, the performance of the country, economically, or even culturally, even politically?
If you're talking about, I mean, there's a lot to unpack with your question there, because one, you have kind of destination branding, destination marketing, and I think a lot of that comes from government and civil servants who are not in tune to like what's going on in the world and all the stuff. I think anything to do with the civil service in Taiwan is everything we've said about the private sector times 1,000. So yeah, obviously in terms of like destination branding, location branding, I mean you can see the results. Like a lot of it kind of falls flat. It doesn't really connect, and it's not interesting. It's not cool. It's not. But I think a lot of people have said that stuff. In terms of Taiwan in terms of business, I mean, these are old problems that Taiwanese companies can't build brands and can't build consumer brands, and that's where the high margins are, because if you B2B is low margin, a lot of what Taiwan does is low risk, low reward, like low margin kind of business models, which are really stable, very profitable. But then it's also a very wealthy country, and um, I mean it's not that much of an emergency because it's kind of working. But the other thing about having these companies that have low margins, low revenues is it also kind of it works on kind of like a lot of people work on low wages and this kind of stuff. So I think it does have kind of an downstream impact on society, because it's hard for Taiwan to build kind of low margin service industry kind of business models until they can get past this kind of branding gap.
I pretty much agree with everything that Matt just said. I mean, Taiwan is a top 10 global economy, but it is punching below its weight. It is not having the sort of kind of global impact, say, Korea is right now. I mean, South Korea is running circles, right now around the rest of East Asia, but places like Japan, you, you know, they're just they have more of a presence on the global stage. People, the world is more aware of them and understands them more. And like Matt also said, it's a very complicated issue. And like he also said, it's an old issue. I mean, here we are talking about brand again. I mean, when I first came to Taiwan in the early 2000s, over 20 years ago, we were also talking about brand. I mean, the problems, like he said, they're not new ones, and many Taiwanese companies are comfortable with and have been content to kind of just grind out a living, eke out a living, you know, mo modest margins, very steady, very safe. It's almost like a machine running. It's very precise. It's calibrated a certain way, but that's not how you get rich. I mean, you can make a living off that, but it's not how you get rich. And Taiwanese brands, or at least most of them, I mean, TSMC can get rich anyway, regardless of their brand efforts per se, but pretty much everyone else, they need to take more risks, take more chances, because the world will not come to them like they'll come to TSMC. They need to do more and they need to risk more.
So it's interesting actually that you mentioned this is an old issue that in the industry of marketing you've been discussing for a while, and that was really the point actually to give the floor to both of you, because I don't believe that audiences interested with global affairs in Taiwan were aware that it was such a problem. And we are exploring here the problem, and we apparently find it difficult to identify solutions. Are there some good news? Are there some things that Taiwan do well? I remember when we started the conversation, for example, Matt, you said here people work hard, etc. But more into details. Is there a success story somewhere? Something that was done, something you witnessed that was done very good in terms of marketing that you would highlight?
I think I think the best Taiwanese global brand is Din Tai Fung. If you look at like the way they do everything, like Din Tai Fung has built like a really good global brand, and then all of the other, and then they've got a very detailed, structured model of how they do everything. Like they pay their staff good wages, so and they turn their staff into ambassadors, and they've got rules about how their staff speak to customers, and everything is done to a precision. It doesn't matter if you're in Din Tai Fung in Seattle, you're in Din Tai Fung in Seoul, and it's consistent and there's message. I think there is a change. I think it was really kind of moribund around 2012, 2013, like Asus. A lot of these companies didn't really know what they were doing, and they wanted to move up the value chain, and they were trying to do like trying to be Apple, but they don't have the resources or the culture to do that. But I think the Taiwanese companies are doing well, like staying in their lane a bit more. So you're seeing like within gaming, like Asus and Acer, that like doing gaming PCs, and that's the kind of what they know, and they're quite decent at branding in those areas. And also, I don't think it's if you're talking about Taiwan building global brands, the meat of the Taiwan economy is always going to be industrial components. It's always going to be semiconductors. It's always going to be contract manufacturing, and that stuff is making money and it is stable. So even though I've kind of like talked about this stuff for like over a decade now about these issues, it's not really a crisis mode as well, because at the same stage, like Taiwan is still pretty good at the stuff it's good at.
The good news is if I go onto the average Taiwanese company's website, it's gotten a lot better in the last few years. I mean, AI has permitted global Taiwanese companies to attain competence, let's say world-class competence. I mean, even just a few years before ChatGPT arrived, you go on a website, you'd see Chinglish everywhere. You'd see a lot of ugly or bad things. But now the baseline level of quality is much better, much more professional, but they've solved one problem. They're less Chinglishy, but now they sound more like AI, which means they sound a lot like everyone else. They sound they sound better in that they've improved over the old struggles that Taiwan used to have, but now they have new struggles, and the new struggle is to stand out in that field, to rise above merely sounding exactly like everyone else, to rise above sounding like an AI generated website that has nothing behind it, that has no people behind it. I mean, people want to do business with people, and Taiwanese people need to make sure that this is reflected in their marketing on the global stage. They can't just hide behind AI. They need to be able to reach out. They need to express more humanity, express their humanity through their marketing. I feel that is the next step, and Taiwan needs to take it.
In my experience of working in Taiwanese companies for a long time now, I think that the young people are right now, and the young people I work with, and the young people when I worked freelance in the companies I work with, they're a lot smarter, they're a lot more open, they're a lot more creative, they're a lot more in touch with the world, they have a lot more ideas, they want to speak up, they want to try new things. And compared to a decade ago, I kind of felt like young people were dead, and they were they had no like direction, and they just did what everyone was doing the same things. They didn't really have any hobbies, and they were like, and that really affects marketing, and they were just doing what the boss wanted. But I'm around a lot of really bright young people who want to know what's happening in the world, and they want to do more than they want more for Taiwan, and they really want to build global stuff. And so I've seen a real generational change. That's something which I kind of feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I want to add something to what Matt just said. He's right about all that, but I feel that the next step is realizing that it's not about being interested in the world. It's not about wanting to talk to the world. It is about Taiwan needs to realize that it is the world. It is the part of it. I feel like for a long time, Taiwan has sort of operated in a sort of limbo, kind of half in the world but half out of it. Because of its, well, we all know why. But I feel that. I feel that marketers, brands, companies, whatever, they they cannot treat the world as a separate place outside of Taiwan. They are part of it, and the world wants to hear from Taiwan. I mean, Taiwan is one of the most geopolitically important places on earth, and I wish Taiwan had the sort of confidence that one might expect would come from being in that position, the willingness to grab the mic and speak more.
And that's yeah, this is really excellent, and this is actually the whole purpose of what I'm doing as well. So I totally echo your sentiment, not only about the fact that Taiwan should indeed step up and have a confidence that matches its places in the world and its potential, but also what you say about young people, uh, because based here in Kaohsiung, especially, I always put an emphasis on dealing with younger people, on trying to give them a voice, and I find them extremely different from their elders, much more dynamic, much more creative, ready for a challenge, and also ready to speak with the world, which is not really the case for previous generations who seems to be pretty much like sitting there waiting for the world to come to them, whereas young people are much more eager to take the mic, as you said, and speak. Can you tell me a bit more about that, about the feeling you have about this young generation? Do you think that they could really change the situation for Taiwan?
I hope so. I really hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I'm positive. I'm positive. I hope so. I think they, like we said at the beginning, for real change is like, I think that need to trust some of these young people, because innovation doesn't come from older people. They need to trust these people and give them opportunity. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And also really agree with what Jason just said, because that's something I really feel as well, is that Taiwan needs, if I just talk about companies, they need more self-belief. And I think he really touched on something which I deal with regularly, is that, I'll give an example of a competitor in the US is doing something, I've done something market-wise, or they've done some kind of campaign, and then my Taiwan colleague will say, yeah, but Taiwan's so small, we can't do that, or it's a small market, or so there's really, I really like agree with what he says, that Taiwan is the world's ninth biggest economy in the world. It's one of the most important places in the global supply chain. It's high education levels, blah 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 blah, and there needs to be more like self belief that can do things on those like higher levels.
It's not just a matter of having the will. They have to do it the right way
Mm.
because the internet is not neutral. You know, I mean, like historically, Taiwan relied on Twitter back when it was called Twitter. But they can't anymore. And if Taiwan wants to make itself heard, they have to make sure that they do it in a way where they can't be pushed around or outspoken by competing voices. And that is something I also hope that Taiwan's companies and its young people, that we keep turning back to remember to do. It's not just a matter of making noise, because everyone can make noise now, and machines are making noise. Some people think that machines are making more noise than people are now, and so Taiwan has its work cut out for it, and has to do it in the right way, in the smart way. But Taiwan is very smart. I know they can.
So now, how could we help them actually? Because as we mentioned, it's kind of difficult in this country being a young person, even when you are talented and willing to work hard. So what could we do to help them?
I can't say anything. I just think that what can we do to help them? I mean, when I was working with my younger colleagues, I don't know if I can help them, but what I say is that if you want to be global and you want to, it comes from curiosity. I wrote a LinkedIn post about this before. It comes from curiosity of like, you need to read more, you need to see more, because if you're only just, even if you're smart and you're ambitious, you need to be reading not just the news, I'm talking about the industry news in China, the industry news in the US. You need to know what's going on. You need to know what campaigns people are running, what products they're running. And the more kind of input you've got from the world, the more you understand, and the more, even if you're just focused on the Taiwan market, you can't be creative unless you've got enough uh, input. So I don't think I can do anything to change it, because I never see that as my role. But like, if I was speaking to the young people, I mean, when I speak with my teams and stuff, that's what I just say is just try and be as broad as possible. Just try every day to read like the global industry news, global marketing news, just to broaden yourself. And that's how you really become globally minded. It's not about traveling. It's not about speaking a language. It's about being curious and open to what's going on in the world, especially in your industry.
If I could talk to them, what I would say is speak your mind in English. I mean, I mean, Taiwan has excellent English language skills. You wouldn't necessarily know it if you were to walk into a bank or something like that, but English is the global language, and Taiwanese people, when they do speak in English, like on social media or wherever, I've noticed they tend to be very careful with their words, or they don't use a lot of them. They don't, they don't necessarily want to admit that they're, discomfort with the language or that it's not perfect, but also it's not just about their ability to speak it, it's what they say. There's there are certain things they don't want to talk about. There are certain things they don't, many of them don't really want to get into in English as opposed to the native language. They're much more careful, but that needs to change. They need to say what they really think more, because that is how you get heard, and that is how they will get heard.
Jason and Matt, thank you so much for your insights today. That was very enlightening. And well, wishing you good luck in the future in your work.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really fun.
Yes, thank you. I've enjoyed this. It's been very interesting.
If you want to understand Taiwan, you should read good books. One of the fundamental texts to understand what Taiwan is today is Formosa Betrayed, written by George Kerr. Here is someone who can tell us about it.
I'm Jonathan Benda, and I'm a teaching professor in the English department at Northeastern University in Boston. And I'm currently doing research for a biography of George Kerr that will hopefully come out next year.
George Kerr was an American official stationed in Taiwan when the island was handed over from Japan to the regime of Chiang Kai-shek. He belonged to a faction within the American state apparatus that favored the rights of the Taiwanese, but was in the minority compared to those who wanted to hand the island over to Chiang's Republic of China regime.
So Formosa Betrayed is what I would call a personal history of George Kerr and his experience during the early post-war period in Taiwan. He was a former naval intelligence officer during the war, and later he was the U.S. vice consul in Taiwan until April of 1947, and he witnessed the 228 incident, or what he called the March massacres, where KMT soldiers killed and imprisoned thousands of Taiwanese people after an uprising that was brought up by the incompetence and the corruption of the KMT government in Taiwan after the war. And the book is not just about the evils of the KMT. It's also very critical of what the United States did and didn't do during the war and after the war in relationship to Taiwan. So he starts out with the Cairo Declaration that promised Taiwan to Chiang Kai-shek, and then he blames the U.S. State Department for treating post-war Taiwan as just basically another part of China and not intervening in any way during all the corruption and then the massacres and everything else that happened after 228. It's also a very personal book because he was there during that time from 1945 to 1947, and he saw the things that were happening. So he's kind of comes across. Let me say that again. He kind of comes across as a witness to history in this book.
The book is fundamental to understanding the ambiguous role played by Washington and the complexity of its relationship with Taipei, as well as the grievances of the Taiwanese people today. It remains an extremely important book to read for anyone who wants to understand Taiwan.
Well, I look at it as kind of a warning, I think. I don't know if Kerr would have felt that, but I guess he would have. I think Kerr would have thought of it as a warning as well, that people of Taiwan, and maybe more generally, people in Asia, need to be careful and need to watch out for themselves, I guess you could say, and because the United States is not always dependable, I guess you could say, in a very diplomatic way. American relations with Taiwan have always been complicated by a combination of domestic politics in the U.S., some benevolence, some, personal interests, national security interests, foreign policy interests, and domestic concerns in the United States. And so he talks a lot in the book about how, every step of the way, the U.S.'s approach to Taiwan was not really taking into consideration the wants and the desires and hopes of the Taiwanese people because of the United States' larger policy interests concerning anti-communism and that sort of thing. And then when it went over to, when Nixon went to that's actually after Formosa Betrayed was written, but when Nixon went to China and Kissinger went to China, he saw that as yet another betrayal. In his letters, he talks about that a lot. So the message of the book, I think, is still very timely, and his warnings about the need for not only for Taiwanese people to kind of stand up for themselves, but for the U.S. to take into consideration Taiwanese hopes and aspirations still holds true today, I think. There's a paragraph where he gives an anecdote of something that he witnessed at the height of the massacres that I think really illustrates what he was criticizing about both the KMT and the Americans. So he says, I shall not forget the wordless appeal in the eyes of four well-dressed young men who passed my gate and my protective American flag at midday on March 13th. They were tied together by ropes, attached to wires twisted about their necks. Their arms were bound, and they were being hurried along toward the execution place on the banks of the Keelung River nearby. The ragged nationalist soldier prodding them along at bayonet point saw the American flag on my Jeep and gave me the smartest salute he could manage. Here was the betrayal in its most simple terms. The Formosans looked to us for help. We armed and financed the nationalists, and the nationalists were making sure, if they could, that there would be no more appeals to the United States and democracy. So I think that quote is like, in a nutshell, what he's talking about in Formosa Betrayed, that while the Taiwanese looked to the Americans for help, the Americans were supporting the oppressors, the nationalists or KMT. A certain group of Taiwanese read it a lot, especially like exiles in the United States, for example. They read the book, and it was really kind of an eye opener to a lot of people when they read it, because they didn't necessarily learn about 228, growing up. They certainly didn't learn about it in school, but even their parents wouldn't necessarily talk about it. There was like a whole generation of I guess graduate students, for example, in the United States, who, when they read that book, they felt like their eyes had been opened, and so that contributed to the Taiwan independence movement. But more generally, I don't think it's as influential among Taiwanese people as you'd expect. It did sell very well. It's sold, maybe because it's been on the market, and it's still in print in Taiwan. In the Chinese version, there was a Chinese version that was translated in 1974, and after 1991, that book was able to be put on the market in Taiwan, and it sold pretty well. I don't remember the exact figures, but it did pretty well. And then there was a new Chinese translation that was published, I think, in 2014, I believe it was. It's well known among a certain group of people, but generally speaking, maybe not everybody knows about it. But it sold better in Taiwan than it did in the U.S., though. I'm going to say that. Much to George Kerr's dismay, it didn't crack, more than, say, 10,000 copies in the U.S.
But we should not limit ourselves to older books. Here is the author of a new book that has relevance to Taiwan and the whole of Asia.
My name is Bilahari Kausikan. I spent, almost 40 years in my country's foreign service, but I'm retired now. I'm a pensioner. So whatever I say is only my own opinion and doesn't represent anything else than my own opinion.
Mr. Kausikan wrote The Myth of the Asian Century, and it is a seminal read for anyone looking at the geopolitics of the region, of which Taiwan is an important part.
Apart from a purely geographic sense, Asia is a very diverse continent, and there is no strategic coherence to it, because some of the most difficult international problems today are between Asian countries. You have India and China, you have China and Taiwan, you have China and Japan, you have Japan and South Korea, you have South Korea and Japan and North Korea, you have both the Koreas and China, and I can go on. These are all Asian countries. When you talk about an Asian century, you seem to assume that there is a coherence of interest among these countries, which doesn't exist. this idea of an Asian century has been appropriated by China, the People's Republic of China, I mean, as if China represents the whole of Asia. Now, China has done well economically during the 1980s, 1990s, the first decade of the 2000s. And I don't think it will be, but it's entering a period of slow growth where certain structural difficulties are manifest. So China's rise is real, but it is a country like every other country. It has its strengths, it has its weaknesses. And I don't see any reason why China should represent the whole of this very diverse continent that we call Asia.
Mr. Kausikan also explains why the relationship between East Asia and the United States today deserves to be looked at from a broader perspective.
Mr. Trump puts America first, right? But I know of no country in the world that does not put its own country first. You know, I have been a diplomat for nearly 40 years, I told you, and my mission is to put Singapore first. As a Taiwanese diplomat, we'll put Taiwan first. A Japanese diplomat will put Japan first. In fact, not putting your own country first is almost treasonous. Now, what is the difference between Mr. Trump and previous administrations is not merely that he is less polite than the past, but I think more fundamentally, after the end of the Cold War, after the demise of the Soviet Union, the US faces no existential threat anywhere in the world. And that has led not to a retreat from the world, but to a narrower definition of American national interest, to a more transactional definition of American national interest. Or you could say, as I said, every country puts itself first, a more normal definition of American national interest. Now, Mr. Trump has a unique personality, that's of course correct. And his personality colors how he articulates American policy, how he articulates his goal. But we should cut through all this noise and look at the signal. There has actually been certain consistency in US policy in this region. The US will not let any other power dominate this region. By this region, I mean East Asia or the Indo-Pacific, right? That's very consistent. The US has been very consistent as offshore balancer, maintaining stability in this region as offshore balancer. Now, I don't think this is going to change under Mr. Trump. He may articulate the interest differently, but he's not going to abandon this region. He is not going to abandon any region because the US is a global power, although one that now defines its interests in a more narrow and transactional way.
And this makes it a very relevant book to read for anyone who wants to understand Taiwan.
Although my book doesn't deal directly with the Taiwan question, it sets out a view of the world, which is a rather bleak view. The world is a world in which international relations is and always has been throughout history defined by competition between states. And where there is a competition, there is always at least a possibility of conflict. Now, Taiwan must take this reality seriously. If you don't rely on yourself, other countries will not help you. I think Taiwan should focus less on the form of relationships and much more on the substance of relationships. I think Taiwan's foreign policy focuses too much on form and not enough on substance. Now, I can understand why. Because Taiwan feels very isolated, because China is trying to isolate Taiwan. That's a fact. And so it's entirely understandable that you place a lot of attention to the form of relationships. But I think that is a futile battle. It's much more important to place emphasis on the substance of relationship. And in that respect, I think all the ASEAN countries are quite willing to have substantive relationship with Taiwan, but the form will have to be within the framework of one China.
We will meet again next week for a new episode of Taiwan versus the World.